Welcome everyone to exercises in computational gastronomy. Have any of you guys heard this word before the conference? This term? Mac? We have a group, the Utah Gastronomes. We get together and talk about incredibly nerdy aspects of food every second Saturday. At the end, if you want to look at my contact info, you can get in touch with me if you want to show up. So, we all know what computational means, obviously, so let's talk about what gastronomy means. What is that? According to the root of all knowledge, it is the art of food eating, as opposed to some other kind, I guess. The study of food and culture. And we're going to study food at a detailed level today, with a focus on gourmet cuisine. Gourmet. So, first off, before we even get into this, I'm going to be lazy and show you guys a video. Have any of you guys seen the Harvard lectures? Harvard has a series of food science lectures. They're awesome. They've done them 3 years now. And a lot of my heroes speak at them, and it's pretty awesome. This one does not have one of my heroes. And in fact, I'm not even going to show you the lecture. I'm going to show you the warm-up act. This is about 8 minutes, but it'll kind of get you into the frame of mind for what's going on here. Okay?
We decided so there's this long list of people, and I put 3 of their pictures up here: Elaine, Angelino, Diana, Kai. Elaine is a computer science graduate student. Diana is a computer science undergraduate. Naveen is a graduate student in cooking extraordinaire, science and cooking person who must be here someplace. And then there's a whole host of undergraduates. And we decided to try to make phase diagrams of recipes. And so here's the deal. So Joanne's going to talk about baking and is going to teach us a lot about it. And so here's a recipe for sugar cookies. And if you look at any recipe on allrecipes.com, you will notice that there are 2 parts. There are the ingredients and there are the directions. So right now we're only going to focus on the ingredients since this problem is already too hard for me. So now as you all know, the absolute amount of ingredients doesn't matter. All that really matters is the ratio. So I mean, you might consider, the relative amounts of things is all that matters. And so for example, if you wanted to think about this simply, so here's like a standard bread recipe. You can mix water and flour and get bread. So 40% is water, 60% is.
Isn't it fun when you start getting into computational gastronomy and seeing how the professionals actually deal with this stuff? That is by weight. We would never measure flour by volume because, why, Jared? Because it compacts. So a cup of flour could weigh 3 ounces, it could weigh 7 ounces, depending on how tightly it's compacted. So it's better to go by weight. And you'll notice they weighed it out by grams.
We want to make bakery phase diagrams. What we're going to do is very unusual, and we're going to express this on a plot. So what you can do is you can make a plot where you can plot flour on the x-axis and water on the y-axis, and you can put a dot at the bread recipe. See, this is what would have happened to you if you hadn't escaped. You can then sort of play around with it and think about recipes that way. And of course, it works for bread, but it also works for more complex recipes too. Like here's my favorite brownie recipe. So you can take all of the ingredients, and they have percentages. There are lots of ingredients. And, of course, you can't represent all of them on a plot, because I don't know about you, but I can only make a plot with 2 and at most 3 axes. And so, you just pick a couple of your favorite ones, and you start making plots. So sugar, cocoa powder, flour, things like this. So here is the brownie recipe on a plot. So this is flour, and this is sugar, and that star is the brownie recipe. This is the baker's breast brownies recipe, which is the only one I know how to make. So anyway, so that's 1 dot. So you say, well, that's very interesting. Well, what about all recipes? Wouldn't it be great if you could do that for everything? So, well, this is the 21st century. And so you can imagine doing this. And so what we did is the following thing. So Elaine and Diana downloaded, this may not be illegal, actually. We downloaded all the recipes from allrecipes.com. So we have an Excel spreadsheet which has on it all the recipes. And once you have them.
Anyone getting any ideas here? That was my first thought. Actually, my first thought when he said we can only plot 2 things. Amateur. These guys at Harvard. What do Harvard guys know?
Then you can start making plots. And this is a bit of a tricky matter to do. There's a lot of steps, and I'm going to go through them very quickly because you guys want to hear Joanne. You have to look at the the thing, then you have to look at the HTML source code, then you have to figure out how to find the patterns, and it's just a nightmare. And you write computer programs, it's really a nightmare. And you end up with this thing with all of this thing. That's our spreadsheet, you see. And anyway, but then when you're done, you can say, gee, I know about the baker's best brownie recipe. What do all the brownie recipes look like? And so we did this, and this is the answer. So this is sugar, this is water. And those are all the brownie recipes in allrecipes.com. So isn't that interesting?
Yeah, he misspeaks a lot. I like this, though, because we can now look at brownie recipes and say, okay, we have kind of this range of error, right? And some of those recipes, it looks like if we made them, maybe they may not work out so well. Be interested to try.
So now it's not clear what it means. And so then you say, well, gee, what about other recipes? This is so great. So you can take the brownie recipe, and then you take a sugar cookie recipe, and you notice that the sugar cookie has different ingredients than the brownie. You knew that already. But so then you can say, well, let's make plots of sugar cookies. So you take all the sugar cookies, and there's all the sugar cookies on the thing. And then you say, well, what about pancakes? And so, there are pancakes. Those are all the pancake recipes. And then you sort of go crazy and you have lots of points everywhere. And then if you're creative, so this is the only way you can create a new food if you're a mathematician, is you then say, well, look, there's a star up there that's not there, so that must be a new food.
Anyone know a recipe that fits in that range? Red vines. That's about the ratio for red vines.
So see, we discovered a new food. So that's how we discover new foods. So okay, but now I want to, and I'm just going to take 3 more minutes, is that you then say, well, because we're supposed to ask questions. I mean, it's a question of what you do with this. It's not clear what you're supposed to do with this. But anyway, so here's a question. This is one thing that we did with this. So you could ask yourself, here's a question. What constrains the set of recipes? That's an interesting question. I mean, so how many of you have cooked brownies? So when you so when you cook brownies, then there's just a little region of phase space that has brownies, and if you go far out, maybe it'll be something else. So you can ask, why is that? So we sort of were sitting around wondering what constrains them, and we came up with 2 hypotheses that I wanted to show you. There are 2 hypotheses. So here they are. 2 hypotheses. Number 1 is history, and number 2 is physics. And let me explain what I mean by that. So history goes by the following thing. Well, there have been a few creative chefs in all of eternity, and they invent new dishes, and everyone else just tinkers with them and makes new dishes. And the reason that the brownie recipes look like they do is because that's just the way brownies are. That's Number 2 is physics. So you could say the laws of physics are brutal. The recipes that can be invented have been invented. The recipes that haven't been tried don't work. Those are the 2 possibilities, right? And if you're a poor mathematician, see if you hadn't.
On the brutal laws of physics, if you guys go and look for this on YouTube, there will be links at the end of this of the slides. But you'll see a lot of applications of the laws of physics to these, to some weird foods that people come up with all over the world historically. My favorite is the string of sugar. The guy just keeps pulling sugar and comes up with thousands and thousands of strands of sugar. You have to take a look. What? Yeah, that goes under physics. Yeah, history.
Right? And if you're a poor mathematician, see if you hadn't, then you would have. This is the only shot you have of inventing a new food. So anyway, I just want to tell you about history. We don't have time to do this. So I'm going to show you a little bit of history, and then we're going to stop. So let me show you what I mean by this. So suppose you go to allrecipes.com and you find a recipe. So this is a recipe for Aunt Gail's oatmeal cookies. And then suppose somebody else, you go and you find another recipe. Here's another recipe. It's coconut rolled sugar cookies. And then suppose you want to pretend like you're smart because you don't know how to cook, like me, and you say, well, I want to invent a new recipe. So here is something you could do. What you could do is you could average the 2 recipes.
We do that all the time.
So you just take the 2 recipes and you add them together.
Did you hear her in the background? Professional pastry chef. We do that all the time.
And you add them together, and then you say, well, I've done it, I've invented a new recipe.
We do that all the time.
Okay, so you do that all the time. So the question is that really a new recipe? So who thinks?
Who thinks? New recipe? Who thinks it's not? We're like half and half. You like what she says.
Who thinks it's not a new recipe? Wow, so most of you didn't vote. This isn't going to work. Who thinks it's a new recipe? Who thinks it's not a new recipe? Okay, so I think the not a new recipe one. I don't really think it's a new recipe. I mean, come on, you just took two things that were known and you averaged them. That's not new. I mean, you wouldn't apply that to any other part of your life, averaging them is new.
You take red and yellow and you mix them together and you make a new color.
Okay, that's a good point, but let's ignore that for the moment. So what we wanted to ask ourselves was, to what extent are the brownie recipes in allrecipes.com, to what extent do they reflect creativity, and to what extent do they reflect new? And we actually, so Elaine and I did a little test. We wanted to see if allrecipes.com would take any brownie recipe. So we put up a recipe which contained broccoli as an ingredient, and they wouldn't take it. They rejected it. So apparently they do have some standards.
Amateurs.
So the question is, to what extent are these averages of things? So we wanted to find this out. So the following is what we did. We started calling up people and we said, can you tell us what the most important recipes for brownies and cookies that were ever invented were? Just tell us. And so we were sent to lots of old books. And we went to the old books, we got the recipes, and we plotted them on the phase diagram. So these are the canons. So these points, these are canons pre-1900, 1900, 1950, et cetera. We just called people up and asked for the canon. And then the question is how can we tell if the online recipes are new or are they merely linear combinations of the canon? And it turns out that, and this is what's really cool. So, Joanne, I would like to tell you a mathematical fact. There's one mathematical fact. Actually, not Joanne. She was an applied math major. She knows this. It's the rest of you. So it turns out that the set of recipes that can be obtained by averaging the others is inside what is called the Convex Hull. This is, you've learned a mathematical term today, of the points. And what you do, it sounds really sophisticated because we all like to make ourselves sound smart. But what it really means is the following. So what you do is you take all the points, and you take the points on the outside, and you just connect the dots. And everything inside is boring. So therefore, we immediately see that in these recipes, there is a huge uncreative region.
Who believes that? I'm not buying it either.
Whereas outside, there is some hope at creativity. It's only around the edges. So creativity lives only around the edges. Anyway, that's where I wanted to end.
And that is where we end him. So, you can clap if you want. Soft clap. So, now we have an idea of what I mean by computational gastronomy. We're going to have fun with some formulas. We're going to have fun scraping some websites. Well, I've already scraped the websites, and you'll see kind of the fun that I got into in analyzing these things. And I think I promised some people there would be code, and there will be code. So, first off, I put together a nice little web scraper to go download my recipes for me. And it is written in Bash. Isn't that awesome? I could have done it in Perl, I could have done it in Python, I could have done, well, those are the three languages I would have used. But this showcases one of the really cool things in Bash, elinks. Because elinks has this capability of rendering out a page the way it would normally display it from the command line. And so basically it strips out all the HTML for me. So now I've got a whole bunch of recipes, it's about 43,000 actually. I've got all these recipes, and I've already stripped out the HTML, and I can go and analyze them. Well, the first thing I was going to use this for was analyzing keywords. What I wanted to do was be able to look at a page and guess based on the keywords, weighted keywords, how many there are per page, and so on, what type of page I was actually looking at. And for that, this works really well. Unfortunately, when I want to go through and start analyzing things by ingredient and by step, it kind of falls apart because a rendering of a page kind of makes things ambiguous, right? And even just the first couple of recipes that I looked at and tried to parse out, they were a pain. I had ingredients spanning multiple lines. I could kind of try and tack things together, but I would have had to do that for all the recipes, and there would be weird edge cases, and that's just a pain. So let's start over, and I don't have a slide for it, but I changed that to -source, went and scraped it again. Google was kind enough to give me one of their cloud machines, so it's one of the preview accounts. They don't know they did this for me. And they went and scraped all the sites for me again, which is good because it ended up being about 6 gig worth of HTML that Google scraped for me and tarred up. So, well, it's not like Google doesn't go there all the time anyway, and they want Google to go there. And so, just looking at these recipes that I scraped out and dumped out and rendered, I said, okay, I want to look for everything that has cheesecake in it, and I don't want things that have only, that don't have any results on them, right? I don't want things with one result. What I started doing is just adding on numbers and seeing how many things got filtered out, see how close I could get to only getting cheesecake recipes. And obviously, well, I started to notice patterns. Things that were actually cheesecake started having numbers that were really high, 61, 72. And things that weren't cheesecake, generally speaking, had numbers that were pretty low. But, well, I found some cheesecake recipes that were still kind of low. And, you know, where's the threshold here? Where do I decide, okay, 42 is the magic number? Well, somebody else decided that for me anyway. But where do I decide where to delineate? Well, if it has cheesecake in the title, that's one way to do it. I decided to take a different path. I decided to, well, first off, what this is looking at is the renderings. That's why it's a .text. Yeah. Yes. So the problem is we have too much noise. This was looking through rendered HTML pages, and the reason the things that have cheesecake had such high numbers is because they had links to other cheesecakes. And really that's kind of the problem. And that's why the other things were showing up, is because not that they had cheesecake in them, they just had, you know, 1 or 2 links, maybe 6, 7 links to cheesecake somewhere on the page, and so the title showed up. So we've got a lot of noise that we've got to filter out and take a look at it again. So I decided to convert things over to JSON. It's not noisy. In fact, it's probably, the second least noisy format I could use other than plain text. The least noisy I would think would be YAML, but, you know, parsing that can be kind of iffy still with raw data you're getting off the web, right? So I went with JSON, and then plus I could feed it into the parser later on and start looking at it and run more or less the same search again. First off, here's the HTML. This is the cool thing about allrecipes.com. They are so kind as to go out and divide up the recipes for me into unordered and ordered lists, and even put things inside spans. So all I had to do was feed it into an XML parser and pull out the correct spans. And this is why I learned fun things about Python. This is the first Python parser I put together for something like this. Anyone in here know Python? Please don't cringe. It's ugly. I'm not very good with LXML. Who is good with LXML? I know a guy in Portugal that gave me a kind of a start, and he wasn't available to help me out. What's that? Good width? XML is not complementary to anything. I'm sorry. Yeah, XML is like violence. If it doesn't work, use more, right? Awesome. So, actually, one awesome thing about XML is that it gave us well-formed HTML. So it makes it easy for people like us to steal. Anyway, so exactly. So I took that recipe that we were just looking at. I took the entire recipe. I parsed it into JSON, and I came up with, well, this is a cheesecake recipe. Is this a real cheesecake recipe? Looks like it. Let's look at it a little more closely. How many eggs do we have? No eggs. How long do we bake it for? Right. So, and actually, no shame in this, prepared graham cracker crust. Actually, I take it back. Prepared crust, no shame in that. I don't like using graham crackers for cheesecake because everybody does it. What's that? It's historical. So I went and dumped everything out to JSON, and I went and did my search again, and you'll notice I'm only looking for things that don't mention cheesecake. And this list actually went from about 1,000 and change to about 200 and change. So somewhere around a fourth to a fifth the size. And everything in this list matches, but there were still some things that popped up because some of the directions would say things like, press into a cheesecake-like crust. So obviously filtering it out by the word cheesecake isn't a good enough thing to do. So, we'll get to that in a second, I guess. First off, when we're parsing our recipes and we're analyzing them, we actually care about 6 things in this case. And I've listed out the calories per gram, or kcals, which is the actual name for them. Water is calorie-free. Protein averages about 4 calories per gram. Carbs averages about 4. Alcohol, which is a super carb, it's a super sugar, right? It's about 7 because it's super. And fat is up to 9. And then you guys know what ash means in food? Everything else? What do I mean by everything else? Why do we call it ash in the first place? Everything we eat pretty much has ash in it. Why do we call it ash? What? Carbon? We'll go with carbon. So here's what they do. You guys know to determine the amount of calories in something, they burn it, right? And fat burns at a certain rate, and the alcohol burns, the protein burns, the water is going to evaporate, and everything that's left after all the calorific food is gone, everything that's left is ash. That's why they call it ash. What's that? Fiber is carbs. Yep. It's a complex carb, yeah. And it is actually calorie-free because you can't digest it. But it still counts as a carb. And it'll still burn. So, for our purposes, we're going to call a cheesecake something that has cream cheese, eggs, sugar, and requires baking. Okay? Now, this is going to filter out a lot of things that might technically qualify to some people as cheesecake. For instance, vegans, they're not going to use any of those things. They'll use vegan sugar. You guys know there's such a thing as vegan sugar? There is. The stuff we buy isn't vegan because they bleach it with bone. Isn't that tasty? I'm not worried about it. They bleach the sugar with bone. I'm not worried because that's what they use to make Jell-O too. So sugar's not vegan, so none of these things would really show up in a vegan cheesecake. But that's okay. I don't care about these vegan cheesecakes for today. What I care about is a more classical cheesecake. You guys know what the standard New York cheesecake is? A lot of bone. So there's a classic New York style cheesecake. It does not have ricotta. It does not. Italian style cheesecake has ricotta. No, that is a sour cream cheesecake. Actually, you can put sour cream in a New York style. No, it doesn't have to have that. It can have sour cream. The most important thing is the ingredients are cream cheese, eggs, sugar, and vanilla with a graham cracker crust. And you can play around with other things. You can put sour cream in there. You can put like cornstarch in there, tapioca starch, things in there to help bind it together. But this is a basic New York style cheesecake. If it has mango in it, if it has cherries in it, if it has anything inside the cheesecake itself, it is not a New York style cheesecake. But if usually in New York they'll put berries on it, pie filling. That's acceptable, just not inside. So I went through and started separating out the shaft, and I did it the long way. Actually, what I did is I hit up and changed stuff a lot because bash is awesome. And you'll notice it kind of goes off the bottom of the slide. They're all basically the same command. First I look for cheesecake, put it into one directory. Then I look for cream cheese, I put it into another directory. I look for egg, sugar, and then the word bake. And so we got down to, let's see. Our last directory is for cheesecake. We have 156 supposed cheesecake recipes, right? Here. 156 recipes. So we could look at it and compare them and feed them into something. Obviously, looking at this slide here, you can guess I didn't do that. What I did was I took it down to 2 cheesecake recipes, which I don't think are even on the list. One is kind of one that I came up with. Oh, let me get you that in a moment. For those of you that want to follow along, I've got a spreadsheet up that's got the recipes we're going to be looking at. The first one is a New York style cheesecake. Now, several years ago, when I was at work, and I was working and doing stuff that I was getting paid for, I was looking at cheesecake recipes, and I was kind of doing this in my head, and I looked at it and kind of decided eventually, after looking at all these recipes, that a standard cheesecake recipe, kind of a blank slate, starts with 2 pounds of cream cheese, 4 eggs, a cup of sugar, and 2 teaspoons of vanilla extract. And then the very next recipe that I came up with after that on the Googles was Nick Malgeri's classic no-frills New York style cheesecake, which was exactly those ingredients in those amounts. Yay me. Ooh yeah. So I thought that was pretty awesome. But as I started to make a lot of cheesecakes over the years, I discovered something. There's a lot of variables that can affect this. If your cream cheese isn't soft enough, if your eggs are too cold, basically what you come out with is a cheesecake batter that is hard to spread in the pan. And when you bake it, it doesn't settle down and flatten out or anything. You kind of get it lumpy, whatever you use to spoon it into the pan, that's what shape it's going to be when you're done. So I started adding more eggs. And that's going to do what to our cheesecake? What's it going to add? Volume, protein, what else? Air? Not really air. Generally speaking, you don't want air in your cheesecake batter. You'll get it, but you don't really want it. What's that? It will, because eggs have water, and water turns into steam, and that is a physical evening, right? But really, the more important thing here is water, which is going to throw off the cheesecake setting, right? Fortunately, eggs also have an emulsifier. You guys know what an emulsifier is? Who doesn't? Emulsifier is something that gets two things that don't want to stick together. Generally speaking, that's going to be fat and water, since they don't want to stick together. In fact, no markers. That's okay. I'm set. So, an emulsifier is going to have certain molecules on it that are hydrophilic. You guys know what that means? They love water. And things that are hydrophilic are also lipophobic. Is that the word? They hate fat. But an emulsifier is something that has molecules hanging off it that are both lipophilic and hydrophilic. And so what happens is the water sticks to that, and then the fat sticks to that, and it kind of pulls it all together, and they stay in a stable emulsion, right? And eggs have one of the greatest emulsifier, lecithin, right? So not only are we going to increase the moisture, we're going to increase the lecithin, so everything should, in theory, kind of work out, right? What's unfortunate about these calculations we're going to look at is that they don't take the lecithin into account. In fact, they only take those other things into account. Let's go over to our spreadsheet. This is our standard New York style cheesecake. Let's fix the browser here. Okay. Oh, this is, first of all, we got some USDA values. The USDA has a great database that's available. It's free. It's the USDA standard reference. I don't know what version I got this from. It's up to like 26, 27 by now. We have a unique key that identifies the ingredient. This is what they call it in the database. And then everything in the database has at least one column for measuring things by 100 grams. And then some things have other things, like bananas will show one banana is this many grams, and here's all the other information, but 100 grams of banana is this. And they'll actually go down to whole butter, unsalted, whole butter, salted, whole butter, separated. I guess that's not whole butter. Clarified butter. You start searching through the database, and you'll find all sorts of weird variants of things. So I went with the most basic variants I could find. You notice that bottom one there is not a New York style cheesecake. We've got a key lime white chocolate cheesecake too. And we're going to kind of compare the differences between them. We've got the things up there that we care about. Ash is not a thing that we care about. We should, but we don't. And you'll notice that we've got per 100 grams, so we've got some calorie counts. Tasty, tasty. That's, in America, 82 to 83% fat is American style butter. I'm sorry, American style is 80 to 81%. European style is 82 to 83%. So if things taste more buttery in Europe, that's why. It also throws off your baking percentages. So keep that in mind if you decide to get fancy and go buy, go down to Harmon's and buy the Irish style butters. So this is our New York style cheesecake. And I've increased the egg count to 6, which turns out a batter that is pretty easy to pour. It gave me a little bit more volume. And what's cool about this recipe too, pro tip, it fills exactly one half-size sheet pan. That's our pro tip. We should start handing those out. Does somebody want to help him out? Or do you have them spooned out yet? Okay, we'll give it a second. So we'll notice here, with my New York style cheesecake, we've got 51% water. We've got a lot of water in there, right? This is before we start, before we bake it. We have a very tiny amount of protein. I was working at Deer Valley one day, and somebody came up and told me that they wanted a bagel, and they wanted some cream cheese for the bagel so they could get some protein. And they didn't believe me that the bread had more protein than the cream cheese. Yeah. Anyway, so we have a very tiny amount of protein, lots of fat, fair amount of sugar. In fact, I think it's kind of sweet personally, but other people think it's kind of tart. It's just a personal thing, right? And then per gram, we've laid out how much we have per gram, which looks amazingly close to the percentage, huh? I guess I didn't really need to do that. Oh, and our total amount per cheesecake. This is a 9-inch cheesecake. Total amount of calories? Yay. That's about a day and a half worth of recommended values, right? That is a whole cheesecake. 2 days? Sometimes it happens, right? Okay. Let's hop over to our key lime white chocolate cheesecake. Let's see if you can shrink some columns here. Oh. Because I want you guys to see the calorie value there. Ouch! Now before you start freaking out about how many calories are in there, let's take a look at the amount of cream cheese that's gone into this. It is almost double. And obviously the sugar has gone up, and you'll notice too, you'll never guess that I got this from a baker, a professional baker. So everything's in weight like it should be. Hop back over to a New York style cheesecake. We have 6 eggs, 1 cup of sugar, 2 teaspoons of vanilla extract. Seriously, guys. So convert everything over to weight, a lot easier to deal with. Key lime juice, it's okay to measure that by volume, especially key lime juice, because it's also 6 ounces by weight. Yes? There's a US standard cup and there's a UK standard cup, and they are not the same. So if any of you guys get recipes from England that say 1 cup of this, it will not work. Again, let's convert to grams. That's true. That's not true, because they got a lot of recipes from India. When it comes down to it, that's why England conquered India, right? So they could eat. For the tea. So they could also drink. I've already given you permission to tackle them. Okay. So we've got some wildly different sizes here. And what we're interested in is, again, percentages, right? Now, when we first made this cheesecake, we noticed, well, first of all, looking at that amount of lime juice, that's a lot of water. And those eggs, look at all those eggs. At about 50 grams per egg, how many eggs is that? It's a lot of eggs. Okay, yeah, go ahead and hand these out. Everyone, we're going to hand out some cheesecake. Don't eat them yet. There's forks over there, too. Don't eat them yet. I'm going to talk you through each one of the cheesecakes so we can talk about what they are and kind of some differences in them. Okay, so we noticed that the key lime cheesecake had a really wet batter. And it looks like it'd have a really wet batter, especially with all that juice in there, right? If we look at the water, it's got less water. And also, if we look at our calories per gram, that's where it really counts, right? Since we can't tell exactly how many cheesecakes, this is like 2 10-inch cheesecakes, but we've got 3.41 calories per gram. Looking back at the New York style cheesecake, we've got 3.06. So a classic New York cheesecake with no healthy lime juice and citrus is actually less calorific, right? But this one will keep you from getting scurvy, and that's important. I'm losing everyone as soon as I pass out the food. Anyway, so moving on. Actually, so here's the problem. I didn't want to make up, I didn't even want to cut this in half because I didn't know if it would fill up an entire cheesecake pan. I didn't want to do this amount because I'd have who knows how much left over. And leftover cheesecake is just a tragedy, right? So I made a copy of this and just started playing with numbers, and I did them in weird columns because I like that. Let's go ahead and shrink this down. So what I came out with was this recipe over here. This is how much of everything I actually used to bake these cheesecakes over here. We run out yet, or are we going to have extras? We're good? Okay. I want one too. Here, give me one. I'm good. Thanks. Okay. So let's talk about these cheesecakes that we just handed out. I need a fork too. Right. Or you could just eat them using your toothpicks. Okay. Right. Forking the recipe. Okay, so we got 3 different cheesecakes here. You guys only saw recipes for 2. If everyone wants to take a quick bite of the one with the red toothpick, see how this one turned out. It's supposed to be heavy. It's cheesecake. It's good. So, turns out, you have a certain amount of time that you're supposed to bake cheesecake for in a 9-inch cheesecake pan. And we're talking about an hour or so. And I wasn't thinking about that when I put in the sheet pan. And so I put it in for about an hour. And when I opened the oven at an hour, there was this big balloon on top from all the steam. Because I had baked that cheesecake 3 times longer than I should have. And I just made you eat it. Awesome, huh? It's still not bad. If you guys want one that's not burned, go ahead and try the one with the yellow toothpick. And that was only baked for 20 minutes. It is better, right? Tastes a little bit less like scrambled eggs. Now let's compare and contrast with the lime cheesecake one, which actually has... You can palate cleanse with more cheesecake. And because I hate using graham crackers, I didn't use that for the key lime one. I used Nilla wafers. You notice we did something else too. Even though we've got all that key lime juice in there and we've got all the eggs in there, we also have white chocolate, which is going to even out by adding more sugar and fat. In fact, the texture, probably the chocolate, because the chocolate's really going to affect the texture. There's a fair amount in there. Well, white chocolate. It's not even chocolate. It's cocoa butter, sugar, and vanilla. That's if that's your takeaway, go for it.
Sorry, I was swallowing.
Okay. So now we can start tweaking with these recipes. Going back to our New York style cheesecake, I see this as a blank slate. If you guys want to start experimenting with cheesecakes, this is a really great place to start off. First off, before you even get into that, can anyone here tell me the first rule of cheesecake? Don't tell anyone you know how to make cheesecake. Because as soon as somebody finds out you know how to make cheesecake, you will make a lot of cheesecake. Exactly. That said, now that you can make cheesecakes and hide them away from everyone and never tell, this is good blank slate. So let's say we want to make a cherry cheesecake. What's a good way to do that? What's that? Copy the tab. So we could use cherry syrup. What's this going to do? What are the ingredients in cherry syrup? Sugar, water, and ash. Actually, this one's sugar. No corn syrup. I go for the good stuff, man. We have pure cane sugar, water, natural cherry flavor, citric acid, sodium benzoate as a preservative, red number 40 and blue number 1. So, sugar, water, and ash. All right? That's a good idea. I would switch over to the key lime one and say, okay, no more key lime juice. Let's add in some cherry stuff, and let's go ahead and increase the white chocolate. And let's just start playing with our spreadsheets and see if we can come up with something, more or less within this percentage range. Right? If you have enough egg, it probably will. If you're worried about it, there's a couple things we can use to mitigate problems with that. Adding starch is a good way to do it. Anyone here have a corn allergy? Always? Anyone that matters? You're welcome. But there's lots of people with corn allergies, and so if you think you're going to be dealing with somebody with a corn allergy, go to the Asian market and buy tapioca starch, because I don't know of anyone that's allergic to it, and it's cheaper, and it works just as well. So, what's that? As far as this is concerned, yes. In soups and sauces, no. In soups and sauces, the tapioca will fall apart before the cornstarch. Okay? So we can start adjusting the recipe to add our cherry syrup. Or if we want to add maraschino cherries. Anyone here like maraschino cherries? And how? Anyone heard that they have formaldehyde in them? They don't. But I heard that from a bartender. Well, the problem is they've still got the moisture inside, so they're going to seep out while you're baking it. So how do we mitigate that? Anyone have a food dehydrator? I did some dehydrated maraschino cherries the other day. Awesome. And just enough. Like, I stuck them in there for 2 or 3 hours, tasted them. That's good. I like that. Al dente. Well, now you don't have water to deal with in your recipe. So, no. So what happens is that's not an ingredient for this. It's not going to affect the how it sets up or anything. It's called a Not an additive, even though you add it. What? Chunky? It's not you could call it chunkies. No, it's a something. It's like in chocolate chip cookies. They'll bake exactly the same way, whether or not they have chocolate chips in them. And if any of you guys make a lot of chocolate chip cookies, you'll notice that the last one usually doesn't have any chocolate chips. I noticed that. Garnish. That is the word. The chocolate chips are considered to be a garnish. The maraschino cherries would be a garnish. If we put nuts in there, they'd be a garnish. They don't actually affect the outcome of that physically. They just add more to the food, right? If you dehydrate them. If you don't dehydrate them, they're a garnish that will affect things. But they're still a garnish, right? If you plan on doing chocolate, like putting chocolate chips in your cheesecake, pro tip, either use the little tiny mini ones or melt the chocolate and stir it in. And as soon as it'll hit the batter, it'll harden and turn into little tiny chocolate crisps. So, okay. References, and I'll put these slides online. Well, actually, they're already online, and I think I set them to public already. USDA standard reference is where you can look up all the values that I used. If you want to convert food volumes to weight, this is a really good database. It doesn't have anywhere near everything, but it's not bad. Harvard Food Science Lecture, if you want to watch that one or any of the other ones all the way through, that's where they are. And I'm going to leave those links up there for a few minutes in case you guys want to go look at them. If you have any questions, those are my Twitters. Good.